Lecture 1-1, Economics, Choice, and Soviet History. We asserted in the introduction, and economic reasoning proposition number 1 specifies, that social phenomena arise from people's choices. Now, that may seem a bit abstract when applied to decentralized societies like ours, trying to visualize the process by which the decisions of millions, actually hundreds of millions of individuals, coalesce and interact to direct our history and our future can be a challenge. However, the connection between individual choices and historical change is a bit easier to see in centralized societies, where the choices made by those in power directly shape the lives of citizens. Thus, studying the command givers, if you will, in a command economy like the Soviet Union, fits well with our purpose in this first lesson, to illustrate the process of opportunity cost analysis. We'll start our study at the top of the Soviet social structure and ask, how did the choices of the premiers and Politburos direct the journey of the USSR from 1917 until 1991? In each historical period, we'll identify the decision makers. You know their names and recognize their pictures. Tsar Nicholas, Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Andropov, Kosygin, Chernenko, Gorbachev, and finally Yeltsin, and ask a series of questions to help us understand the choices they made. First is the context. What did the decision maker perceive to be the alternatives he faced? Next, what did he perceive to be the benefits and costs of each of those alternatives? And how did he value the various benefits? What choice did he make? Which is also to ask, which benefits did he value most? And which benefits was he willing to forego, and why? And finally, what were the results of his choice? Who bore the burden of the decision, and how did they react to that burden? If these sound like history questions, they are. They invite us to use all the tools and sources of the historian and to ask the related questions about information, perspective, values, influence. Questions like, why didn't the decision maker consider this alternative? Or how did his past experiences or his values influence how he weighed the benefits and costs? But notice that at their very foundation, these are also economics questions. The economic way of thinking begins with acknowledging that because we live in a world of scarcity, choice isn't an option. It's the ultimate imperative. The concepts embedded in economic reasoning propositions 1 and 2, scarcity, choice, and cost, are sometimes referred to as the economic trilogy because they're central to the economist's view of the world and how it constrains human behavior. Scarcity is generally the first concept dealt with in economics textbooks, and the given definition is usually something along the lines of the problem of trying to satisfy unlimited wants and needs with limited resources. While definitions like this are widely accepted and quite correct, they can be confusing, maybe because there's a disconnect between that model and what we observe around us. Start with limited resources part of the definition. When exactly is a resource limited? When there's a finite amount isn't a very helpful answer. What about when there's not enough to go around, or when there's not enough for everyone, when we're running out, or when there's less now than there used to be because it's getting used up? All predictable, common answers, and arguably correct, but not particularly believable in terms of what most of us in the developed world experience in our everyday lives. Take oil, for example. It's an extremely valuable resource. We're really dependent on gasoline. If we ask whether it's limited, we'll get the, that's a dumb question look. I mean, everybody knows that we're running out of oil because there's only so much of it in the earth and we keep taking out more and more. So of course it's limited. But what if we change the question to, can you buy all the gasoline you want? Essentially the same question, but a really different answer. Well, sure. If I'm willing to pay the price, I can buy all the gasoline I want. You probably don't even have to check. Your local gas stations aren't running out of gas. For goodness sakes, lots of them are open 24 hours a day. So the problem in trying to approach the study of economics by defining scarcity is that our experience is often not one of limited resources, but of abundance. The other half of the definition of scarcity, unlimited wants and needs, may also conflict with our experience. Do you really see yourself and your neighbors as greedy pigs, always wanting more, more, more? I'm guessing not, or at least not all the time, or not all of them. In a collective sense, and over the long term, unlimited wants isn't hard to accept. Populations continue to grow, so human wants and needs must also. And new things are created that we didn't even know we wanted or needed before. But at some level, doesn't it seem like there are times when we have enough? Or that we'll get to some level of comfort and satisfaction that's enough? Another difficulty is that the definition says wants and needs, implying that the difference is important. It invites us into the frustrating experience of trying to distinguish between them, and then, inevitably, into making judgments about what people need and what they only want. The implication being, of course, that if greedy people would give up their wants, then less fortunate people would be better able to satisfy their needs. But that's misleading. The economic definition of scarcity is intended to capture an abstraction rather than to provide a prescription. And determining whether a particular person is using a resource to satisfy a want or a need in any particular set of circumstances doesn't do anything to reduce the impact of scarcity. We'd actually be better served by lumping those two words together in one, wants and needs, allowing us to focus on the real issue, the relationship between resources we have and the many, many things we can do with them. And yes, in the physical sense, all resources may in fact be finite, but economics adopts a relative perspective, considering the use of a resource for one purpose versus another, or considering using a little more or a little less. So to begin with the traditional definition of scarcity risks starting the study of economics with a misdirection, focusing on absolutes rather than relatives. For example, no one would suggest that we're currently running out of whale oil, even though declining whale populations mean that, in fact, there is less of it than there has been in the past. And you probably can't buy whale oil, or you'd have to pay an exorbitant price for it, so you're unlikely to do so. So that leaves us with the question, are we running out of whale oil because there's less of it than a century ago, or are we not running out of it because we choose not to use it? So what if we approach economic thinking not through a definition, but by looking at human behavior, the doing economics that people engage in every day, making choices? That's really what scarcity is all about, making choices between competing wants. Since our wants are satisfied by resources, we can also think of it as making choices between competing uses of resources. A definition of scarcity that fits with the realities of people's daily endeavors is that scarcity is a condition that forces us to choose. Now, this is not to suggest that resources are not in fact limited, quite the opposite. Focusing on choice implicitly recognizes that resources are both limited and precious, and that our lives are constrained by those realities. Our lives are, in fact, a daily journey of choices, even in the face of abundance, as we drive to the always open gas station to buy gas, or select items from the all-you-can-eat buffet, or shop in the full to overflowing shelves at the local grocery store. We're constrained by the limits on our resources, so we choose. Aware of it or not, we do scarcity, all day and every day, acting out the reality that our wants and needs exceed the limited resources we have to satisfy them. Besides allowing us to avoid pointless arguments about what's a want and what's a need, or exactly how much of a resource exists and when the trend lines predict it will be exhausted, approaching economics by focusing on choice leads us naturally to the most fundamental and one of the most powerful tools of economic reasoning: opportunity cost analysis. Economic reasoning proposition number 2 declares, and our life experience confirms, that choices impose costs. Note, the word is cost, not price. And note that cost is that other alternative, the next best option, the opportunity you didn't take. And then note that it's not abstract. It's not about elusive, unlimited could-haves, but about concrete, limited would-have. It's about recognizing and weighing alternatives, prioritizing them, and choosing. This is the economic reasoning tool we will apply to the choices made by Soviet leadership on the journey from 1917 to 1991. So before we jump into the history, we'll spend a few minutes working with it in an easier context. Historical inquiry is a bit of an abstract endeavor to start with, and when we add in opportunity cost, we're adding more abstraction. Think of it, the next best foregone alternative. What does that sound like to a new learner? Okay, so the opportunity cost is when I give up something I didn't have anyway? That's not real convincing, is it? So it's worth the time to develop some confidence with analyzing choices in the here and now before we apply opportunity cost analysis to historical decisions. So let's start with a simple one in which there are only two obvious alternatives, and a decision I'm sure you made first thing this morning, whether or not to get out of bed when you first woke up. We're going to use this chart as a convenient graphic organizer, and I think you'll find that it helps make the opportunity cost decision more concrete. Now, since this is about choice, the first thing is that we have to have a decision maker. That would be you. And just a brief reminder of economic reasoning proposition number 1 here. It's people who choose, not governments, not societies, not countries, people. Yes, sometimes they act in groups, sometimes they act individually, but still, it's people, not amorphous entities or forces. Next, we have to identify the alternatives the decision maker considers. For many decisions, there are numerous alternatives, and the first step is to narrow down the possibilities to 2. In this get up now decision, that's easy, which is why it's a good example to start with. So you can either get up now or not get up now. With more complex decisions, what to do this weekend, for example, the decision maker may have and may consider literally hundreds of alternatives. Okay, now, note that the considered part is important here. If the decision maker didn't consider it, it wasn't part of the process. Now that's particularly interesting to think about with historical decisions. Ask why someone didn't consider a particular alternative, for example. Anyway, when there are lots of alternatives, we have to prioritize them and narrow it down to the top 2. But we can skip that in this example, because we're starting with a choice that really has only 2 alternatives. All right, so consciousness hits your brain, and you consider your 2 alternatives. Get up now or not get up now. To make the choice, you think about the benefits of each alternative. Start with getting up now. Is that a good alternative? Are there benefits? Well, I can think of a lot of them. Going for a run, taking the dog for a walk, reading the newspaper before work, stopping at the coffee shop, generally not having to rush. Your list may be different, and that's okay. Remember, you are listed as the decision maker at the top of the grid, so it's not my perception of the benefits that matters. Okay, now, what about the other alternative, not getting up now? Are there benefits to that? More sleep. 10 minutes until the snooze buzzes. Well, that's about it for my list. Only one benefit on the list. I guess that makes the choice clear, right? Not so fast. That's another reason this is such a good illustration of opportunity cost. It shows that what matters is how much you, remember, you are the decision maker, how much you value the benefits on the two lists. It doesn't matter how long the lists are. I can think of times when I definitely value that 10 extra minutes of sleep more than all the benefits of getting up right away. And I'm sure you could too. Okay, so you compare the benefits and choose one alternative. Now, note that there are still only two alternatives, even though each one has a list of benefits. When you choose one opportunity, say, to not get up now, you give up the next best opportunity, the opportunity to get up now. Your choice comes with benefits, but the next best alternative had benefits too, and giving up that alternative, you refused the benefits. So in my chart, I'm going to have the benefits of the foregone alternative migrate over into the refused box. Okay, so there's nothing correct or inevitable about my choice. If, on the other hand, you choose to get up now, you'd get the benefits, enjoy your cup of coffee on the way to work. Having refused the benefit of the extra sleep by hitting the snooze alarm and not getting up now. Opportunity cost analysis isn't about determining whether someone made a good choice or a bad choice. It's about understanding why and how the person made his decision by looking at what he perceived to be his alternatives, the benefits of those alternatives, and the value he placed on those benefits. And that opportunity cost isn't always the same. I might value those benefits differently on a day when I'm headed to the airport for vacation than I would on a rainy Saturday. Okay, so just to recap, my alternatives are to get up now or not get up now. If I choose to not get up now, and by the way, that doesn't mean I'll never get up. I have to face that same decision in 10 minutes when the snooze buzzes. Anyway, if I choose to not get up now, then my opportunity cost is the next best alternative, the opportunity to get up now. And since I don't get up now, I don't get the benefits that opportunity offers. Think about it this way. Choosing is actually refusing, isn't it? You narrow down to the two best opportunities, each of which seems to be good, each of which has benefits, and in order to choose one, you have to refuse the other. All right, we'll wrap up this portion of Lesson 1 with a few caveats to keep in mind when you're using opportunity cost analysis. First, if you don't know what next best is, you don't know what the opportunity cost is. It works like this. Suppose I choose to get up now. My next decision is what to do after I get up. The alternatives are walk the dog, check my email, read the newspaper, or cook a pancake breakfast. If I decide to check my email, what's the opportunity cost? Answer? You don't know. Because although you know what I could have done if I hadn't checked my email, you don't know what I would have done because you don't know how I prioritize the other alternatives. Opportunity cost isn't all the opportunities you didn't take. It's only the next best one, the one you would have done. Second caveat, only the considered alternatives matter. Notice that scrubbing the kitchen floor wasn't on my list of alternatives at all. It's not an option I considered. So it's not part of the equation and can't be the opportunity cost of checking my email. Now, if you saw my kitchen, you might think it should have been on my list of alternatives. But opportunity cost comes from what I put on the list of alternatives, not what you think they should be. And this is particularly important when applying opportunity cost analysis to historical inquiry. If we're going to understand the choice that was made, we have to look at it through the decision maker's eyes, not with the extra information we might have long after the fact. Third caveat, opportunity cost is not the same thing as consequence. Economic thinking recognizes that choices are made in light of an unknown future. So the full burden of the opportunity cost occurs only after the decision is made. Suppose that if I hadn't checked the email, I'd have walked the dog. So the opportunity cost of checking my email is that I gave up the opportunity to walk the dog. I refused all the benefits that went along with it. Exercise for me, tiring the dog out for the day, enjoying a beautiful morning. At the time I made the decision, I evaluated those benefits and decided that checking the email was more valuable. Okay, but then it turns out that I forgot about a meeting at work and I can't stop by the house at lunch to let the dog out like I usually do. I get home in the evening to find out that the unexercised dog has chewed up my favorite pair of slippers that I left by the door. Question: are the ruined slippers an opportunity cost of my decision to check my email? Now think about this carefully, because this is one of the easiest mistakes to make when using opportunity cost analysis on historical decisions. The chewed up shoes are a consequence, not a cost, of my choice to check the email. It's that unknown future thing. Sure, I knew that one of the benefits I gave up was tiring out the dog, and I evaluated that in making my choice. I didn't say to myself, if I check my email, the dog will chew up my shoes. And we can't go back and add unchewed slippers to the list of benefits after the fact. I mean, that would be like saying, the opportunity cost of Abraham Lincoln choosing to go to Ford's Theater was his life. Okay, so if staying home was Lincoln's next best alternative, it's reasonable to assume that one of the benefits he considered was that there would be less risk than going out in public. But it's not reasonable to assume that his list of benefits said, not get shot. Lincoln's death was a consequence of his choice, not an opportunity cost. And in applying opportunity cost analysis to historical decision makers, we have to be careful not to read back into their decisions information they didn't have, but we do. Final caveat. There's no such thing as a free lunch. All choices have costs. We have a tendency to think of choices as between good and bad. But if you look at your own life, you'll probably find that that is rarely the case. And it might be why choices are often difficult. The process of narrowing down alternatives means that you end up trying to choose the best of two good alternatives or the least bad of two bad alternatives, not good over bad. The economic conception of human nature is that it's self-interested. So we're always seeking out our best alternatives and then having to choose from among them. Okay. Time to test yourself on opportunity cost, and then we've set the stage for the journey of choices made by leaders of the Soviet Union. The raffle ticket you got for going to the local school carnival is a winner, and you get to choose between tickets with backstage passes to an upcoming concert by your favorite band, or box seats for the home opener of your favorite sports team. They're on the same day, which also, coincidentally, is the day of your boss's snotty daughter's wedding. Jackpot! You have an excuse to skip the wedding. You take the opening day tickets and call your best friend. Question 1. What's the opportunity cost of the sports tickets? Hopefully, you said the opportunity to go to the concert. Clearly, going to the wedding was something you could have done. But in this situation, it wasn't one of your considered alternatives. The concert was your next best alternative. Question 2, and be careful. Were the sports tickets free? No. You could only have one set of tickets or the other. So you had to give up the concert tickets to get the sports tickets. Choosing's refusing, remember? And the concert tickets were something you considered and refused. Think of it as the raffle director putting both sets of tickets in your hand and then telling you to give back the ones you don't want. Definitely not free. You had to give up something. And if it was a difficult choice to decide which tickets to give back, then we also know that the concert tickets you gave up were almost, but not quite, as valuable to you as the sports tickets you gained. Question 3. When you get into a wreck in the madhouse traffic jam on game day, is that an opportunity cost of choosing the sports tickets? Again, big fat no. The best we can do is to call it an unintended consequence and caution you to factor in the traffic next time you consider the benefits of having opening day tickets. All right, I hope you're ready. Opportunity cost analysis is the first tool in your economic reasoning toolkit, and we're going to use it to look at how the decisions of Lenin and Stalin shaped the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics that replaced Russia in 1917. First, though, we need a little bit of general historical background, and you're going to have to cut me some slack here. Those of you who know a great deal about Russian history might want to get a big stick of gum to keep you from grinding your teeth as I now proceed to vastly oversimplify and cram centuries of history into sentences. Believe me that I don't presume to be an accomplished historian, and I freely acknowledge that I'm presenting generalizations. But I believe that you'll find that the basic outline is sound, and that it serves our purpose of illustrating how economic reasoning can complement and enhance, and certainly not substitute for, historical inquiry. A quick look at characteristics of Russia in the early 20th century helps to set the stage on which the Soviet drama played out. Russia had been ruled by monarchs for almost 1,000 years, the Tsars of the Romanov family for the past 300. In 1917, the throne was occupied by Nicholas II, who had become emperor in 1894. Sharing influence with the monarchy, but also dependent upon it, over the past 1,000-year period, was the Russian Orthodox Church. Nicholas ruled over an empire composed largely of agricultural peasants or serfs. By the mid-19th century, improved ability to deal with the climate problems of cold and drought that had traditionally plagued Russian agriculture and the famous Black Earth Belt that stretched northeast from present-day Romania through the Ukraine had made Russia into a major grain exporter. In 1910, Russian wheat exports constituted 36.4% of the world total. Agricultural efficiency, however, was significantly lower than in developed countries, 20% lower than the United States, for example, and was the result of very little mechanization. In the early 20th century, the Russian literacy rate was extremely low, only about 3%, and most of the population were serfs working for large landowners. The two major cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg, had some small-scale industry, but very little in comparison to the rest of Europe, and in particular Western Europe. The wealth of the empire was concentrated in the hands of the Romanovs. Desire for empire is a continuing theme throughout Russian history, and it's replete with efforts by the Tsars to expand their control over other regions and populations. Nicholas II, for example, had embroiled Russia in a war with Japan, a short and very unsuccessful effort that weakened his position as Tsar. Nicholas also led Russia into World War I very early on, but was unable to sustain any effective involvement. The Turks controlled the Dardanelles, Russia's traditional outlet to the west, and cut off supplies of coal and arms, leaving the Russian army without heavy artillery and eventually without even uniforms and rifles. Efforts to bring in supplies from the Pacific coast were largely ineffective. The single railroad track spanning the nation was unable to handle the necessary volume. And in addition, using the railroad for military supplies preempted the shipping of food from agricultural areas to the cities. As the agricultural regions were torn by warfare, food shortages grew and spread throughout the provinces. Nicholas dithered withdrawing Russia from the war and then allowing himself to be led back in by the lure of empire. Unrest and revolutionary pressure grew. The short version of a complex story is that in early spring 1917, Nicholas II abdicated the throne and quietly abandoned the palace. A coalition of Citizens for Change, under the leadership of Alexander Kerensky, set up a provisional representative government. So, the first Russian Revolution, if we want to call it that, was relatively peaceful, and with very little bloodshed, a representative government took the place of Tsarist rule. But it inherited all the problems that had brought about the revolution. The war was still raging, food supplies were still disrupted, and the Russian army was still undersupplied and ineffective. Under these conditions, the Bolshevik Party, which had been gaining strength for years, rose up against the provisional government, beginning the second and more violent stage of the Russian Revolution. In the fall, Vladimir Lenin, who had been in exile, was spirited back into Russia by the Germans, who hoped his presence would bolster the Bolshevik effort to undermine the provisional government and force Russia's complete withdrawal from World War I. In the uprising of the Bolsheviks, their murder of the Romanov family, and the subsequent civil war between the Red Bolshevik and White Menshevik armies, was the birth of the Soviet Union. Lenin and the Bolsheviks prevailed, waging a long and bloody battle that established early on the strong political legal leg of the institutional stool that supported the Soviet Union. As Lenin came to power, he faced the first choice in a long journey of choices about how to use the limited resources of Russia, now the Soviet Union, to satisfy many competing needs and wants. Topping the list of his desires was to industrialize the economy and build a strong military to maintain his control of the state. But equally critical was providing food, clothing, and shelter for an impoverished citizenry. His choice, to create a powerful state that would pursue his communist vision and keep the Bolsheviks in power, and the opportunity cost of that choice, would shape the Soviet Union for decades. In part 2 of this lecture, we'll put our opportunity cost analysis tools to work as we look more specifically at choices made by Lenin and his successor, Joseph Stalin.